right, week 2 study tips. Hopefully you've got your book, you've gotten started. Let's talk about some more study tips. You want to set up a weekly schedule. You can use an Excel spreadsheet, or you can just sketch it out on paper. But figure out a rough weekly schedule that you'll use the entire semester. So first you're going to put in any work hours, right? If you've got regularly scheduled work hours, put them in. Allow yourself time to sleep. Allow time for meals and showers and any other daily responsibilities you have. If you are babysitting a sibling, if you're taking care of your own kids, put that time in. If the pandemic is over and you're driving to campus, then allow for the commute times and allow for time for parking. And decide on your study hours. If you are taking, let's say, a 3-hour class, or maybe let's say a 4-hour class, and you've got 3 hours of lecture and 3 hours of lab, plan to put in 3 hours of study time for each 1 hour of lecture time. So that there you've got 9 study hours and an hour of study time for each hour of lab. So there you've got another 3. So something like 12 hours a week. That may be more or less depending on the content of the course. Some courses are more difficult, or maybe you've already had a similar course in high school, or you've been exposed to it at work, exposed to the content at work. But do plan on enough study time. A lot of students are looking for quick ways to get the study done, and it really doesn't work in a more difficult class like biology, chemistry, math. In these classes, it's very important to keep up every day. You cannot make it up all at the end. All right, so you've allowed for the other things you've got to do. You're putting in your study time. Let's say that on Sunday, and you'll go ahead and put in your hours on your calendar. This is just sort of an example. So let's say that you're planning to spend all of Tuesday evening studying. Within that time, you're still going to take your short breaks. You're going to set up at home. You're going to get comfortable, minimize your distractions. Tell your family, I'm going to be studying. That if they have a question, you're going to come out in 40 minutes and get a cup of tea or whatever, that will be the time to interrupt you. And then stick with that, right? You're going to make this a habit over time. If you can make it the same time each day, that's great. You're also going to use your odd bits of time. So let's say that you have to get new tires, or you're taking your car in for an oil change, or you're waiting to pick somebody up from the doctor's office or from daycare or wherever they are. You're going to take your book along, and even if you've got 10 or 15 minutes, you're going to use that time to study. For one thing, it makes it easier waiting, right? I don't like to sit and wait and not have anything to do. So if you can study for those few minutes, often that short session is going to stick better in your brain, right? Just because you've only got 10 minutes, so let's read 3 paragraphs. That 3 paragraphs is going to stick really well, because then you're going to think about it as you're driving home. All right. Also, if you're working, if you've got a lunch break, yeah, you got to eat. You eat your lunch, and then maybe review the chapter that you read yesterday, or read another couple paragraphs. Hopefully your coworkers are supportive. Let them know what you're doing. Tell them you're not being antisocial. You just want to have 10 minutes or so to make a little bit more progress on your homework. And again, these short sessions can be very effective in retaining that material later. All right. One of my students provided this. I said, what would you tell somebody else about studying? Actually do it. So you have that study time set aside. You're at your study area, and it's so tempting to just go to your Facebook, you're probably too young for Facebook, or your Instagram or whatever. Actually study. Make it a habit. So that study, you can count within that time. You can count reading, organizing your notes from class, reviewing, quizzing yourself, doing your assigned homework, right? So if you've got an assignment in an online homework like Connect or Mastering, that counts as your study time. And those online homeworks have been designed to be especially effective in study. And some of them are going to have you go back and look at stuff you missed. And that's particularly effective when we look at the same material several times. That's going to help it stick in your brain. That's why each one of these different activities is important. Some students just read and reread and reread the chapter. That it's okay, but it's not the most efficient use of your time. So you want to look at that chapter, get the overview, kind of skim it, get an idea of what's happening in it, and then go back more carefully. So in human biology, as we get into the body systems, you're going to look at that system and ask yourself, all right, what's the function of the respiratory system? Don't go into a whole lot of detail, just what's our function? Okay, our function is to exchange gases with the outside environment. What are the parts? Right? Lungs, of course, the windpipe, nose, all that's part. And then you'll gradually go back and add in more and more levels of detail. For most of us, getting that big picture helps. So any of those stages of looking at materials considered study time. These students are in a study group. Study groups can be very useful. However, if you're getting off track in that group, if you're just sitting there and bad talking the professor or talking about gossip that's on the news or something like that, that's not going to be effective. So study groups are excellent in when you can explain things to one another, ask one another questions, right? You can use the chapter questions at the end of the chapter, or maybe you say to your study buddy, well, I don't understand the difference between external respiration and cellular respiration, and they can explain that to you, or you can take turns going over that material. Very effective. Also, have more than one place to study. It's really good to have your primary study space at home, someplace that's comfortable for you, that minimizes interruptions. But it's also good to have other places to study. For example, here in the library, if you've got a break between classes, right? You've got an 8 o'clock class and a 10 o'clock class, use that time in between to study. Obviously, if we're still in the pandemic, this library is not going to be a good place to study. But in the future, think of that. And you can do a Zoom study group if you want. Ask your professor for a Zoom study group, and you can both be there. And it helps in a way. To me, this library setting, the reason it helps is everybody else is studying too. You don't have fear of missing out. You don't have that FOMO, like everybody else is out at the park going for a jog, or they're going out for pizza, and I'm just sitting here studying, and oh my God, I don't want to study. Everybody else is having a good time, right? So if everybody else is studying there too, it helps a little bit. All right, and here's a student that might be just taking some time between classes, and he's found a comfortable place to study. I don't particularly care for music while I'm studying, but if it helps you, that's fine. But be realistic about that, right? Be realistic to yourself about whether that music is helping or not. All right, we will have more study tips next week.